Hi there, today we are going to be using nested looping in Zapier to modify more than 500 rows in a Google Sheet. So the reason we need to do this is because looping in Zapier is limited to 500 iterations. So if we want to modify more than 500 rows at once in our Google Sheet, we need to use nested looping to achieve this. What I'm going to go through here is a follow-on from a previous video I did. So check out the link to the blog post that I'll put in the description of this YouTube video to come to this section here and take a look at this video because I walked through how this flow diagram works, and we are going to be using the exact same flow diagram in this video here today. So let's start with the end goal of what we are trying to achieve here today. We've got this customer database large Google Sheet, which contains 1,251 rows, and we would like to update the delivery today column. We would like to update every single value here to be false, so therefore we need to update 1,250 rows to be false, so that is why we need nested looping. And the way this is going to work is that we are going to send a webhook from a Google script to let Zapier know, hey, we've got some rows we want you to modify. And then we are going to use webhooks within Zapier to do the nested looping. So the first time we come in, Zapier is going to modify the first 500 rows. Since there are more iterations to do, we are going to send a webhook to restart the nested looping process. Then Zapier is going to modify the next 500 rows from 500 to 1,000. There are still more iterations to do. So then we are going to send another webhook to restart the process. And then Zapier is going to modify the last 250 rows from 1,000 to 1,250. So this is what the overall flow looks like. And to show you what it looks like in Zapier, we've got a catch hook action, which receives the Google script webhook with the starting index of 0. Then we've got a create loop from numbers, which is going to iterate through rows 0 to 500. We're going to update the first 500 rows in the Google Sheet. Then once the inner loop or the nested loop has finished, and there are still more rows that we need to go through, then we're going to calculate the end index. That is the starting point that we'll start at the next time we come into the Zapier workflow. And then we are going to post a webhook to restart the entire looping process. So this is what the flow looks like at the moment. And I'm going to show you now the JavaScript code we use to send a webhook from our Google Sheet to Zapier, which achieves this part in the flow diagram. I'll show you how we achieve this now using a JavaScript code in a Google Script app. I include the JavaScript code you need in this GitHub repository, so you can copy it from here, or you can copy it straight from the blog post here. And then you can come into your Google Sheet, go to App Script, and then you can click the plus icon to create a new script and then copy in the code that you've copied. And then paste in the code that you've copied. I've already got the code in here in the trigger nesting script. And what it does is it gets a reference to the customer database large sheet. And then this function here gets all the values within the customer database large sheet. It gets all the row values. And then we are going to send a webhook to Zapier. And this URL here is this URL that we copy from the catch hook trigger in Zapier. So we are going to send a webhook to this URL containing the number of rows that need to be modified. So the rows.length value here is the number of rows in our Google Sheet. We set the starting index to be 2 because we'll notice that the first row we want to modify is actually in row 2 here. And then the end index is going to be 501 because, as I mentioned before, Zapier is limited to doing 500 iterations at once. So the first time we go through the Zap, we can only iterate through rows 2 to 501. So we send this webhook to Zapier to start the whole nested looping process. We will catch the hook here. And we can see that when we catch the hook, the starting index is 2. We need to iterate over 1,251 rows. And we also have our end index of 501. So now let's take a look at the setup of our looping by Zapier action. We are creating a loop from numbers here. Then we specify our starting index, which is 2, our end index, which is 501, and then we set our loop iteration counter to start at 1 and go to 500. And if we go to test, we can see that it is going to iterate 500 times, starting at row 2 and going to row 501. And then in this update spreadsheet row action here, we specify the worksheet that we want to update. We put in the loop iteration number here so that we are going to update rows 2 to 501, one row at a time. And we are going to set the delivery today column equal to false. So then this is going to happen 500 times. And then we've got a filter in place here that will only allow the Zap to progress when the nested loop has finished its 500 iterations. So that means that the loop iteration is last value will be equal to true. And then we also check that the loop iteration last value is less than the length of rows that were sent to us using the webhook. So in this case here, the loop iteration last value will be equal to 501. This is less than the total number of rows we have, which is 1,251. So therefore, we are going to progress through this filter. Then we are going to calculate the end index for the next time we come into the Zapier workflow using some Python code. In here, we take in the length. We take in the last loop iteration value, which is 501. And we take in our Zapier iteration limit, which is 500. The first part of the code here just takes all the string values that Zapier gives us from the inputs here and converts them to integers, because in order to do comparisons like greater than, we need all these values to be in integer values. So then we check, is the last index value plus our limit of 500 greater than the number of rows we need to iterate over? So in this case, it's equal to 500 plus 500. Is this greater than 1,251? No, it's not. So we don't come in here. Instead, we come in here and we set end index equal to 500 plus 500, which is 1,000. Then the next time we come into this code, the last index will be equal to 1,000. The limit is still equal to 500. So then this 1,500 is greater than 1,251. So therefore, the end index this time is just going to be equal to the length, which is the total number of rows we have, which is 1,251. And then the last part of this code just returns that end index so that we can use this end index in this post webhook. So this URL here is the exact same URL that we copy from the catch hook action. Then you'll notice that we set the starting index for the next time we come into this Zap equal to the loop iteration last variable. So where we finished off in the current workflow, we are then going to set that equal to the starting point in the next workflow. We set our end index equal to the value we calculated from step 5 here. So this is now going to be equal to 1,001. And then the length remains the same at 1,251. And then we send this webhook to the start. Let's load more. So we can see our start index updates to 501, our end index updates to 1001, and our length is still 1251. So then in our create loop from numbers, we're going to go from row 501 to 1001. We can update this. So now the get row using row ID, we are going to update from rows 501 to 1000 in this iteration. And then once this nested loop finishes all of its iterations, and the loop iteration last value here is going to be equal to 1000. This is still less than the total number of rows we need to iterate over. So the workflow progresses through the filter. We have to calculate a new index here. So this time it's 1000 plus 500, which is greater than 1251. So we set our end index equal to 1251. And then this is going to be passed to the post hook action in step number 6. So our end index is now 1251. Our starting index for the next time we come into this workflow is equal to 1000. And then the length is still 1251. So again, third time is the charm. Let's just send this to the top and see what it gives us. So let's pull in the latest request. So now we can see our starting index is equal to 1000. Our end index is equal to 1251. Then we are going to create our loop from numbers, and we are going to go from 1000 to 1251. We can update this. And now the set row using row ID and the update spreadsheet row action from Google Sheets. We are going to update from rows 1000 to rows 1251. And we're going to set all those values equal to false in the delivery today column. And then this time, so the first part of our filter is true because our nested loop has finished all 250 iterations. So this is true. However, our loop iteration last value is now 1251. It is no longer less than 1251, which means we've completed all of the iterations that were sent to us from the Google Sheet. So therefore, this second part of the filter is false, and the Zap does not progress to step number 5, and therefore the entire Zapier workflow ends. I include this Python code here in step number 5 in the blog post. So if you need to copy that and modify it, you can just come to the blog post here and copy all of this stuff. And there you have it. That's how you can iterate through a Google Sheet with more than 500 rows and modify every single row in that Google Sheet. If you want, you can take a look at the other videos I have in this blog post where I walk through how you can do nested looping using an external system. So you do the nested looping in the external system, and then you just do normal looping within Zapier. So that's one method that I show in this blog post. And then the second method, which I mentioned before, is using webhooks. And I've shown you some of that in this video, but I go more in depth in this video here. And I show how we can use webhooks to do nested looping to send a bunch of emails to every customer in a row in a Google Sheet. So you can take a look at these two previous videos in this blog post for some more examples and some different examples of looping, some different examples of nested looping in Zapier. And then at the very end here, I also give you some other things you can check out. Like if you want to find the most efficient way to import different amounts of data into Google Sheets, you can check out the Zapier Google Sheets Quick Start Guide post. If you need a refresher just on simple looping, like the looping by Zapier actions, you can check out the Zapier for each loop quick start guide. And as usual, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section on the YouTube video below. Give this video a like if you thought it was useful. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, please subscribe. Have a great day.